Discover the brotherhood that sharpens you. The ISI community is free for 30 days. Join now at isibrotherhood.com/community. Hey, brothers, welcome back to the ISI Brotherhood podcast, where we help men live the lives of impact in their 5 key pillars of life. I'm your host, Aaron Walker, better known as Big A to our community. But I want to tell you right now, buckle up today. We've got a man with us who has redefined what's possible. Kyle Maynard was born without arms or legs. He's wrestled competitively. He's climbed some of the highest peaks in the world, including Mount Kilimanjaro. And he's built a life and business around a philosophy that's simple to say, but hard to live. And that's no excuses. He's probably no stranger to you. You've probably seen him on the ESPN feature, or maybe the Great Big Story documentary. He even was on ABC's 2020 special around the book that he's written. But today, we're going to go even deeper. Not just the headlines, but the heart. Kyle, welcome to the ISI Brotherhood podcast, man. It is such a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, Big A. I'm pumped about this. And I just wanted to say thank you for all you do. I know you've touched a lot of lives, including mine. So I've gotten to know quite a few people who you've helped over the years. So it's
I
pretty neat.
appreciate that. Well, listen, it is minuscule compared to the lives that you've touched. And we said even in pre-recording, it's really an honor to me that you're here, because what an example you are. Our second core value is no excuses. And so we're kindred spirit at heart, right? Relationships matter most, and then no excuses. So I'm in your camp when it comes to no excuses. But you have redefined that term, like literally redefined it. I mean, I've sent out your videos and things as I was preparing for the interview to my family and to a lot of my colleagues and mastermind members. Yesterday, I showed one of your video clips to our mastermind group that's been meeting together for about 11 years. And when I got through, there was dead silence and they didn't say anything. And I'm like, so what do you say? And one of the guys goes, "What's wrong with me?" And it was so touching, because he's like, I don't have any excuses, right? Compared to Kyle, I don't have any excuses at all. So I just want to tell you, man, you're touching a lot of people. But I want to start kind of at the beginning. I want you to go back early from the beginning. And I want them to see the incredible achievements that you've been able to accomplish. But I want them to hear the real story, that what shaped you long before the mountains came into view. I want people to know what shaped Kyle Maynard. So tell us a little bit of your backstory.
Yeah, I think, family is probably the foundation of it all for me. I feel very, very blessed and fortunate with the family that I was born into. And I think if it had been a different family, I think that things would have turned out a lot different for me in a lot of ways. Yeah. There's,
You mean your immediate family, like your mom and your dad and your siblings, or do you mean extended family? Or
extended family too, grandparents, friends, coaches. Okay. Like I've been very blessed with a lot of like pretty amazing people in my life that, I think that saw the potential inside of me instead of seeing the challenges. To give your audience a little bit more of a visual, my arms basically end at the elbow and my legs end at the knee. And, so when I'm getting around in, airports or running errands, the grocery store, all that stuff, like I'm in a wheelchair and, but I don't use one at home. And, my family had the attitude of, just to make things as normal as possible.
Yeah.
And, I almost, call it like a Jedi mind trick, like in Star Wars, where, there's that scene where they say, like, these are not the droids you're looking for. And they say, oh, okay, these are not the droids I'm looking for. And my parents kind of did the same thing with the disability, where they said, you're not disabled. And basically, it was like, okay, cool. Not disabled. Like they just didn't really focus on that. And there's a quote that I learned later in life that's where the attention goes, the energy flows. And it's, so true. It's if we put our attention and focus on everything that's wrong with the circumstance, we get more of that, and so they wouldn't really allow me to like get stuck in that place. Not that it didn't come up. I mean, there's definitely some hard times, that came up as a kid for sure, but they just wouldn't let me dwell on it.
Yeah, so that took a lot of courage on your Mr. and Mrs. Maynard's part, your mom and dad. Was that just inherent in them? Was that taught to them, that type of mindset? Because that's as far from normal as you can get, right? I mean, most people sit down and they're devastated and they're like, I don't know what we're going to do. And they look for every excuse to kind of limp through. But your parents are like, no, we're not doing that. We're going to make this as normal as possible. Like, you're going to do these things. And you even got into wrestling, which was mind boggling to me. And your coach, by the way, man, I would love to meet that guy one day. It looks like he was a huge inspiration to you as well. But was that your dad's initiative? Was that your initiative? Like even at an early age, you adopted that mindset of, hey, it is what it is and let's go? Or was that learned over time?
I think for them, they understood that, one of the things that was going to have to happen if I was going to, live a normal life was to, take risk with things. And, and they knew that there were some things that were going to be difficult. Wrestling was one of those things for sure. My first two sports I played were football and wrestling. And football, I played nose guard, defensive line. And, I'd just tackle people, taking my helmet and smash it into their shins as hard as I could to bring them down.
I love it.
It was that was my first sport. And then wrestling, I started wrestling shortly thereafter, and it was a totally different experience. I lost repeatedly. I lost 35 times in a row. And, when I was a kid.
All right, let's stop right there for a second. Let's go back to a small kid. You lost 35 consecutive matches. Did you want to quit, or you're like, I'm not quitting for anybody. Like, I'm going to do this. Or did you try to quit? Like, what happened during that 35 loss stretch?
Yeah, I begged to quit. I mean, that's why it's, kids, at that age, I was 11 years old, and I couldn't have made it, long-term decision for myself. I was done with the sport. I hated it. My mom and dad knew better, and they knew that I needed to, at least the kind of compromise that they made with me was that I had to finish the season. And, what ended up happening was I lost every match in 6th grade, didn't want to do it again. My dad convinces me to sign up in 7th grade because he says you'll win a match because you'll find somebody who's their first year, so you'll beat them. And he tells me this big story about how he didn't win a single match his whole first year of wrestling growing up. And it wasn't until many years later I was interviewing his dad, my grandpa, for my book. And I was asking my grandpa, I said, what was it like for my dad when he lost all those matches? Did he want to quit and give up too? And my grandpa had no idea what I was talking about because he had no idea.
He didn't even wrestle. No. Your dad didn't even wrestle, did
he? Actually, he'd been a good wrestler. But the funny thing was that he was like, oh yeah, he won a bunch of matches that year. So, it was, that just kind of was their mentality with things. It's just, I think, they knew that, again, where the attention goes, the energy flows. If they were going to try to keep things where I was focused on the positive and focused on what I was capable of doing, then, I wouldn't be sucked down by the negativity.
Yeah. So what kind of challenges do you remember early on as, 11 years old, 12 years old? What were you up against? I can't even go there in my mind, but take me there as to the challenges that you were experiencing as an 11 or 12-year-old.
I'd say the toughest part of it was, becoming aware of the disability and that, life would be different for me. And, I think it was before, when I was going through all those losses, I didn't see the other side, ended up becoming, wrestling. I stuck with football. Guys kind of got too big and I, stuck with wrestling, but I ended up becoming one of the top wrestlers in my weight class in the country. Ended up fighting in MMA, fighting in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu World Championships, setting world records in weightlifting and, opening up a CrossFit gym that I owned for 10 years, and speaking, traveling around the world, climbing some of the highest mountains in the world, having a New York Times bestselling book, doing all of these things that I never would have imagined or dreamed that I would have done before. as a kid, I think I just, hope is so important to hold on to. Right. And I felt hopeless a lot of the time, and I remember there are nights where I'd beg and plead and pray, and like I'd pray every night that I wake up and have arms and legs. And,
Mm.
it was just a really like challenging, period. But I think faith too is an important aspect, I think, at that point, because, my family would always say that like, God has a plan, and you'll figure out, why you're born this way at some point. And, um,
Were you
that,
ever mad at God? Were you ever mad about your situation? Did you
oh
question,
yeah, for sure. And
like,
I think everybody's lying if they said that they don't, have moments of that where they go and
sure.
get to that point too, but I think it depends on how long and what degree you stay there though, and but there's times for sure where, things feel unfair. And yeah, I've had that as an adult. My grandmother, who was everything to me, she battled and passed from a glioblastoma brain tumor, and just seeing her and the fight that she had to go through. But she used to
Mm.
teach me, like, as a little kid, 3, 4 years old, she would take me grocery shopping with her. And some of the most powerful lessons of my life are just practicing meeting people in the grocery store and just
Wow.
shaking people's hands, going up and down the aisles of the grocery store. We'd just practice. She'd say, "Hi, my name's Betty, and this is my grandson, Kyle." And I'd just shake people's hands, practice that, and say, "Hi, my name's Kyle." And she'd always say, when people hear your voice and they see your face and they shake your hand, they'll totally forget about the disability.
Wow, that is so good. Kyle, early on, did you have thoughts of other people that were complaining or had excuses, so-called excuses? Were you thinking like, you don't have a clue? Or were you like sympathetic with them as well? Were you an encourager and a motivator to others at that time? You certainly are an encourager now, but in your early formative years, did you have a sense of encouragement for others?
I think because my family, like I said, their mentality was to make things as normal as possible, then
Yeah.
I kind of, it's weird. Like I didn't really look at like myself as different, until later on where
That
I
is so
realized.
good.
And so I think it was so important. And I think it's, any time I get an opportunity to go and speak, especially to parents of kids with disabilities, then I say that's kind of, was so critical to me, was just to not make a huge deal about it, to try to minimize things and try to, just focus on the positive. And, I think the no excuses thing came around a little bit later where my, I realized later that my wrestling coach, he would say that to people where he would, there would be kids that would be complaining at practice that they hurt their wrist or they hurt their ankle. And he would say like, well, I would bet Kyle wishes he had a wrist or he had an ankle. And, that would shut up on pretty quick.
I bet it would. Well, let's talk about that book just for a second. No Excuses. And I highly recommend everyone that's listening to this episode get a copy of your book. I love the title because it's not just motivational, it's really a mindset. And that's what we try to teach in ISI Brotherhood today is changing our mindset. But I want to get real just for a minute. In your mind, what is the difference between like a reason and an excuse? Because there are reasons that some things, maybe are not going to work. How do you delineate between the two?
I think that everybody knows it at their like heart, gut, soul level, if you, and, the excuses we want to go and make to just, dodge responsibility and, and duck out on like, and sometimes they're painful, sometimes we mess up when we know that we could have done better. Sometimes we're too hard on ourselves, but like, that's why we like, there's got to be that like introspection to go and see, like, am I complaining about this thing? Or is it something that like, is legitimate? There's because there are real reasons to your point with that. As a kid,
Yeah.
My dream before I played football or wrestled was I wanted to be in the NBA, and like I, I used to watch like NBA, like Atlanta Hawks games while I was, sitting in my bedroom and, I had a Fisher Price basketball hoop that I would just go and shoot basketballs all the time. And that was a huge part of my life back then. And, but no matter how hard I wanted it or worked at it or whatever, like basketball was not going to be my sport. It was
Right.
just, other things I could do. And, that's kind of the case for everybody. It's not everybody's strong at everything, a lot of us, right, we have different strengths and weaknesses, and we have to be able to tell the truth to ourselves about those things. But the truth of the matter is, right, like, if you look at it, like,
You're not going to dunk a basketball.
I'm not
That's
going to
not
dunk a
happening.
basketball, but yeah,
Right.
like, you know, 99% of other people aren't either. It's like it's a
They're
lot,
not. You're right. I'm
maybe
6'4". I can't dunk a
right.
basketball, and I'm 6'4", right? I do good to touch the net, much less dunk a basketball. So I'm with you. But for me, it's been excuses, though. But for you, that's a great reason. And I love the way you delineated between the two. That's very helpful. But the things that you wanted to do that you could do, for the most part, you've done.
Yeah, there have been some, there have been, there have been things throughout the years that that I look back on, and I know that I could have done differently or could have done better. And, and by no means do I want to go and give the impression that I don't make excuses. The way I look at it is like, it truly is a mountain with no summit, no end.
Mm. Oh, that's
It's,
good.
there's always something there. I think when we go and look, and I think that, like, especially, in your audience, you have a lot of like high performing people, and, people with different loads and responsibilities that they're, dealing with, and attempting to go and live a balanced life in terms of family and spiritually, and, all of that and what that entails. But yet, like, we're always out of balance in some area, and some, in our life in some way or something. Sometimes it's in our control, sometimes it isn't.
I think you said something really important I don't want our audience to miss, is that you've got to prioritize what's important. Like, what is important in Kyle's life today for you? What is the order of prioritization today, the things that are important to you?
I'd say since, it's been interesting, even in the amount of time that we've known each other, say over the course of the last year, I've learned a lot too. I think that, like, the younger me that was focused on primarily being an athlete, I've had to realize that, like, I think that, there comes a time in most athletes' careers, and every professional athlete, and to some degree, like, it's like, you retire and then what?
Right.
And, I think I've had some injuries in the last year, and, things that kind of came out of nowhere. Just doing a CrossFit workout, and workout I'd done before. And, the next day, my left arm had swelled up massively with like bursitis. And for
Wow.
6 to 8 months, all I could do was just swim, and that was kind of the only thing I could do physically. And so it was a big, so I had to look to other areas, if it was going to go and provide me fulfillment. And, just, but I think it's given me a lot more perspective on what matters to me, and even just time with family and friends, that, I took for granted before, just to be able to do that. I think I've been really fortunate, and, time to listen to an audiobook or a podcast or watch a TV show without thinking about, like, what else should I be doing, right now?
Yeah.
Like, just, I
Do you
think
feel that pressure? Do you feel the pressure because your name is well known around the world and the accomplishments? Do you feel a sense of pressure to continue that, or do you have a release from that?
yeah, for a long time I have, for sure.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, um,
That can be equally debilitating.
yeah, I think it's, I think I both was very interested in, like, the world of, like, performance. Um, but I kind of was, like, thrust into that, like, world, at a fairly young age. Like, the speaking and, performance culture world, like, they're, very closely intertwined. And, I loved being around, like, high performing people, and, trying to learn, whatever edge I could to be better at something. But it comes with a price too, sometimes, of, like, there's a lack of that balance that comes with things. I learned that, the hard way too. I mean, um, I remember I was having a conversation about this a couple days ago, actually, where I remember, especially when I first started speaking and traveling, it was, had received a lot of media exposure at that point in time. And, um, 19 years old and launching a book on Oprah and Larry King and all this stuff. And I'm, traveling around the world and, like, just going nonstop. And, like, I remember, a whole year would go by, and I'd be like,
Like, where'd
what,
that go?
where did that
Yeah.
go? Like, what even happened?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not all what it's made up to be sometimes, is it? All the glitz and glamour and the traveling, and it's good that you can be an influence, but at the same time now today, as a result of that, you're dealing with some of the repercussions of what's next and what do I do now and how do I progress and how do I live my life to its fullest, going forward. I want to talk about Kilimanjaro a little bit because I'm sure everyone wants to hear what you were thinking. The ESPN piece shows just how intense that climb was. But before you even set foot on the mountain, you had to convince people that you could do it. It's like, hey, you got to talk people into like, I can do this. What was the reaction from others when you first told folks that that was your goal?
I remember the first friend that I told, it was the night, it was the night after one of my first climbs ever. And I had signed up last minute for a CrossFit competition. And the first workout in the competition, there were like 4 workouts over the course of like the weekend. All of them were brutal and intense. But the first one, you had to do a 1,000-meter row on a rowing machine, and then you had to sprint up Stone Mountain in Atlanta. And I don't know if you've ever been to Stone Mountain before, but it's
I have.
maybe not too far from you. It's like 900 or so feet. It's it's sizable when you see it, but it's Kilimanjaro is 19,340 feet, so it's a little different. And I didn't have a pair of hiking shoes to use, and I had previously used bath towels, wrapped around my arms and duct tape. And I had the idea the night before this CrossFit competition. I thought that I was going to use leather welding sleeves, and I thought it would be tougher than the bath towel. The problem was that it was also tougher than my skin and tore all the skin off the ends of my arms. Mm-hmm. And it took me like an hour and 46 minutes, I think, to get to the top of Stone Mountain. And by the time I got up there, my arms were all bloodied and like I was, beat. And but I did it and got to the top, and I was like, wow, I'd been to the top before and ridden the tram, but I think, doing it under my own steam and, what that had meant to go and get there, was a little different. And I was, obviously dead last by a lot. There was another guy that was like a Army Ranger that was a wounded veteran that was doing it on crutches and had been partially paralyzed. I think he did it like 36 minutes. So I was, hour behind everybody else, but did it, got to the top. And I told my friend that night, I said, I'm going to climb Kilimanjaro. And she said, you're crazy. Like, there's no way you're going to do that. After seeing what I looked like after getting to the top of Stone Mountain. And year and a half later, I think from that point, give or take, I was standing on the Kilimanjaro summit.
I watched both of those, and I watched you climb that Stone Mountain, and I watched you climb Kilimanjaro. That climb is no joke. Like, I've got a buddy that did that, Alan Lindsay, trained for 2 years to do that, perfect condition guy. But there's world-renowned athletes that have been flown off of Mount Kilimanjaro because they couldn't make it. I mean, world-class, world-renowned. We won't call their names here for the sake of maybe embarrassing a known personality. But you bear crawled up 19,000 plus feet, 19,000 feet. 230, I think you said. Altitude is no joke. I mean, on somebody in perfect health, good condition. Like, my buddy even said that he started, having oxygen deprivation, started being nauseated. Like that's no joke. Was there a moment where you thought, I might not make it? Or did you always know I'm getting to the top? Like, what was going through your head as you were climbing that mountain?
Yeah, it was, there was a whole range of emotions that I went through. I mean, it was a long trip, and
how long did it take? How long did it take to get to the top?
We projected it was going to take, I think we thought it was going to take 15 days to the summit, a couple days down. Ended up, we did it in 10, not because I was making better pace, but because we decided to change our route, and we went up straight up the west side of the mountain.
The harder side.
Harder side. But it was also like, I knew at that point I was so beaten up and broken that, like, I knew I could do anything for a day or two, but, just the longer, slower route might just be too much for me and kind of a war of attrition. So we decided to take a risk and go straight up the west side of the mountain and the Western Breach. And it worked, and it paid off when we were able to do it. But I remember, night 4 of, 10, when it took us to hit the summit, I was in my tent and I was literally crying. My friends were playing a board game in the tent, next to me, and I could hear them laughing and joking and having fun. And I just was like gritting my teeth and like angry and, just thinking, having a pity party for myself. Like, it's just not fair that they're having fun, laughing and joking. And I was like suffering the weight that I was. And, I felt like that night I was nearly ready to give up and quit. But I didn't.
Did you make an attempt to tell your friends that, hey, I'm done? Or did they talk you in it? Or did you say, no, I'm going to do this regardless? Like, what kind of inspiration was around you for this trip?
Yeah. So we kind of collectively got together. I didn't tell them right then. I said, myself the next day that I just wasn't going to allow myself to think about the pain that I was in. That I refuse to allow. Like I said, I keep saying it, but where the attention goes, the energy flows. It's so true. Like, I just wouldn't allow my mind to like focus on the pain. I wanted to go and focus on, like take my thoughts and focus away from that. And it worked to some degree. And I was able to increase my pace a good bit. But they knew and could see in my face, like I was hurting. And that's when we collectively came together as a group. And there was risk associated with them too, kind of going up the western side of the mountain. That was a more dangerous path. For them, a lot of them is not necessarily what they signed up for, but yet we had decided to stay together as a group. We could have split up and they could have stuck to the original plan, but everybody decided to stay together, and we ended up making it to the top together.
Hey, I'm Aaron Walker, founder of Iron Sharpens Iron. Every successful man needs a band of brothers to push him to grow spiritually, personally, and professionally. Each week, I meet with like-minded Christian business owners in our mastermind groups. We share wisdom, tackle challenges, and we hold each other accountable to grow, not just in business, but in life. Don't do life or business alone. Join the brotherhood that will challenge, encourage, and sharpen you. Visit isibrotherhood.com and take the first step today. Kyle, how important do you think that friend group was, or having your band of brothers as a source of encouragement and strength and support? Do you think you could have done that alone without any of those peers or colleagues or your friend group? Do you think that there's an importance in having that community around you?
Well, I for sure. I mean, what I learned from that too is that there were a couple people that were indispensable, and without them, there's no way that I could have done it.
Why were they indispensable?
From every aspect of just, from the beginning idea to us coming to life, where we had to get the gear and figure out like our, funding, messaging, like everything that we were doing with it, and how to film it, ESPN being involved to film and do a piece, like, there was a lot of logistical issues that we had to figure out.
Sure,
the equipment was an enormous one, where it was just like, didn't have a pair of hiking shoes, like what are we going to do there, and had to seek out people that were going to, help me figure that out. So there were a couple of people that are indispensable, but frankly, there were, like our group too, went through some challenges because it was an enormous group at first that like kind of got whittled down a bit, but
to the core, to the real substance of the people that were really going to do this thing.
Totally. And when we did their next climb on Aconcagua, the next big climb in South America, that was we made it an even smaller team. It was just it was myself, my childhood best friend and business partner Joey, and manages all the speaking engagements, and we got to do over the years. And I had a camera guy named David. We had an American guide named Kevin, and we had 2 Argentinian guides. And there was 6 of us on the mountain for over 2.5 weeks on that one, Mount Aconcagua in South America.
22,000 feet, right?
Yep.
That was no joke.
Yeah.
I love it because you had your core, you had your band of brothers. You had your guys, your community that enabled you to do this. What did you learn about yourself that you didn't know as a result of going through those exercises? Like when you got to the summit and you're like, man, what was a revelation to you?
I think one of the things that I hope to get across to people, especially, in a speech or an interview or something like that, right? Like one of the most important things is that I think we are capable of so much more than we realize. And, I've seen that, like I've kind of gotten to like study that to some degree, and, and I've gotten to meet people that like are, that have done things that they didn't even think that they could do themselves. Right. And, but we don't know until we're pressed with that. We don't know until we have to go and deal with that. And it could be a diagnosis. It could be economic recession. It could be, a number of different things they have to go through, a period of, layoffs, it could be a divorce, could be a lot of things. And, you don't necessarily know what you're made of until you have to like, you're tested in some way. You have to go through it in some kind of way. And it's, I think it just had, standing at the top of a mountain after you've gone through everything to go and get there, then, you're overtaken by the beauty and the fact that, you're only going to be there for a short time and, just trying to take it in and experience it. But yet at the same time, it's like, I think the thing that stays with you is the fact of like, you come down and, you look at what you've achieved and you're like, wow, I can't believe that I was there. I can't believe that I was doing that. Like, what a terrible idea. Sometimes, you're thinking like, but it's just an amazing feeling.
That didn't stop there though, right? You went on to conquer the next mountain, 23,000 feet, just shy of that. For the guy that's listening right now that feels like he's climbing his own mountain, maybe it's his marriage, maybe it's business struggles, maybe there's financial devastation that's lurking on the horizon, maybe it's his health. What is the first thing that you would tell him to do?
Yeah, it's a tough one because it varies so much in the circumstance. But I think to have faith and to know that no matter what, that things not necessarily are going to work out in the right way, but that they have the capacity to. I think one of the most important lessons, from you think about it spiritually, I was just watching the last season of The Chosen, about Christ.
When you say looking at it spiritually, you're a believer, you're a Christ follower.
I am, yeah.
Okay.
And it's and I've studied every religion, and different philosophies and things like that. I'm just a seeker in general, but I would consider myself a follower of Christ first because, I think what he taught was different than just about anybody else. And I think, one of the things in particular that like really struck me just the other day and watching The Chosen, which is an amazing series about his life, there was a scene like one of the last scenes in the show currently, him in the Garden of Gethsemane when he's going through the betrayal, and he's praying and saying like, God, like, would you take this from me? Lord, like, please, like, just take this from me. Like, and, if it's possible. But then he says something that gives me chills to think about, but he says, I pray that your will is done, not mine. And, it's something that like, we can't necessarily see, the whole trail, right? Like we can only see the part of it that we're granted the vision at the time. And I think for him to go and have that foresight to go and say like, let your will be done, not mine, is to go and, say that the whole trail is what is important, not mine. And if you look at like what Christianity is, what would have become of Christianity without the crucifixion? And it's a really tough, challenge, right? Like what he taught and lived, was amazing. But, had he lived and gone into hiding, and hid from the Romans, it would have been a completely different story. So God was able to go and take that circumstance and, use it into something that created, something, beautiful. And I think that's kind of the lesson that my family tried to teach me since I was a kid, that
Wow.
going back to my grandma, helping, me learn to shake people's hands in the grocery store. It's just, if they knew that, like, if they just put one foot in front of the other and headed in, a positive direction, that things would turn out that way eventually.
Kyle, what a demonstration of total faith when he said, not my will, but yours be done. He let go. He let go of the reins. And he was even willing to say, whatever happens as a result of this, I'm good with. That's true obedience. And that's true faith. And man, such an admirable statement that you just made in regards to that. Thank you for that. I know a lot of guys are listening right now and they're thinking, well, I'm not climbing mountains. But man, when I think about it though, Kyle, you've run businesses, you've written books, you've done speaking. What do you think is one mountaineering principle that applies directly to business or leadership?
So I'll tell you, and I can kind of give you a condensed version of this, but one of my favorite lessons I ever learned, and it's something I think about a lot now, was on Mount Aconcagua in South America. And we had to deviate from our plan of, I was going about half the speed of a normal climber, and we'd go halfway to our camp. So from base camp to camp 1, we'd go camp halfway, and then the rest of the way to camp 1, and halfway to camp 2, and the rest of the way to camp 2. But between camp 2 and camp 3, which is a couple thousand feet of elevation change, going up to about 20,000 feet high, it was too exposed to the wind, and the wind would literally pick the tent up at night, and like felt like even when we had cover from it, like we weren't, we felt like we were going to get thrown off the side of the mountain. So we couldn't camp halfway. We had to I had to do twice as much as I had done before in one day.
Wow.
I didn't know if I could do it. And I thought, when my guide told me, he said, like, my job as your guide is your life, to protect your life, not your summit. So he said, if you don't do this in a certain amount of time, in like 8 to 10 hours, then we aren't going to allow you to attempt the summit. And I thought, okay, I don't know if I can do it, but I want to find out. And I turned it into a game. When I'm hiking, I'm bear crawling down on all fours, and my vision was kind of blocked by my ski goggles. And I literally I turned it into a game where I just tried to focus on, like, there was just like the 3 feet in front of me. And that's the only thing I would do. And I wouldn't look up to see how far I had to go. I wouldn't think about, how far we'd come or whatever. I just would focus on the 3 feet right in front of me. And I kind of turned it into a game I wouldn't allow myself to sit and rest. Like, I just would do 3 feet at a time. I'd pause, but I wouldn't sit. And I would, take a breath, and I'd do another 3 feet, and take a breath and do another 3 feet. And
incremental consistency.
Yeah. And I ended up increased my pace a tremendous amount. And like
the focus.
I think I ended up making it like 5 or 6 hours, where my guide said the cutoff was 8 to 10. And, it ended up being wild, but it was literally like, I kind of got to the point where I was pretending in my head that was, the only 3 feet in the world that existed. There wasn't any 3 feet beyond that. Nothing else to go and think about, like, just 3 feet at a time. And, the truth is, I've never met somebody that's so tired that they can't go another 3 feet. And if you ever were at that point where, like, you collapse and die from exhaustion, then you won't even remember that last 3 feet. It's literally just
right.
That, it's so, it's kind of like a mental hack where, I just say that there's never been anybody that's ever, been so tired they couldn't go another 3 feet. And, that's kind of how I've been taking it myself.
So that principle in business or in leadership is just focus on what's before you, and let's accomplish that. Let's do a good job. Let's lead well in this 3 feet, right? Let's accomplish this goal for this shorter period of time. And then think about the next 3 feet afterwards. I love that. I love the intentional focus. And it's not looking so far down at the goal, but it's the task at hand. Let's get that done. The goal will take care of itself.
I think there's just, there's so many things that come up that, we don't want to address that, like we have to sometimes, right? Difficult conversations, challenging decisions, all of those things where we get paralyzed, and just consumed by it. And where we kind of forget the fact that, like, bring ourselves back to, like, what's the next 3 feet look like? It might be the next 3 hours. It's just, what's right in front of me to go and deal with. And there's really, from like an Eastern philosophy perspective, there's only that, right? Like they teach like the power of, of now, and, presence of mind, mindfulness, like, is all about that. Is just focusing on, like, what's right in front of me to go and deal with. Like, all that stuff isn't happening. Like, it's not like you got a jaguar that's waiting in the bush to come attack you. It's like but like our nervous system gets hijacked to the point where we feel like that's the case a lot of the time, and it becomes a big issue. But a lot of the time, I think if we bring ourselves back to that 3 feet, like, and that too is like, we find there, I think that we're capable of so much more. That we are capable of going through it. We are capable of, enduring or whatever it is that we have to do, right there in front of us.
Kyle, that is so good, man. That is so, so powerful. I was thinking about last year at our live event. Our theme was breaking barriers, unleashing growth by facing our fears. What's one of the most scariest thing that you feel like you've ever attempted? Was it one of these mountains? Was it something else? Is it something totally different?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, I'd say, like, there's always a relativity to it at the time. Like, climbing one of those mountains was inconceivable in high school, but yet, like, in high school, I remember being terrified before, if I find out, like, oh, my opponent, in wrestling that day is going to be a state champion from another state or something, and I remember battling nerves from that massively. I remember being scared out of my mind, asking my senior prom date to the prom, and, like, just didn't necessarily know what her response would be. She said yes, and I barely even heard it because I was so nervous. I remember,
Wow.
just competing in weightlifting, MMA competitions, fighting MMA in the cage, like, the whole process to get to that, like, I had to experience there, like, a lot of, like, haters and doubters and people that were saying crazy things on the internet. And, like, I had more, like, 6 times more people Google my name for the MMA fight than even when I was on, like, Oprah and Larry King and all of that. Like, just this massive influx of both positive and negative emotion. For the first time, I had to go and deal with, like, people saying that I was just doing it for attention, like, come take a chainsaw and cut off my arms and legs so I can get on TV too. People just saying crazy stuff. And, behind the anonymous, like, internet screen name, like, people are going to go and say anything. So, I mean, there's been different points where I think, like, there's a lot of, like, the fear and doubt and uncertainty. Speaking, standing on stage, I remember when I first started speaking, scared out of my mind when I first started, like, just hated, like, the fear that I felt there. But I think all of those moments motivated me to, like, develop a sense of, mastery kind of around it, like, to some extent. Like, I mean, when I say mastery, I say that kind of loosely and lightly, because I think it's one of those things that we never really truly harness. It's always something that we can learn more about, ourselves, and doing what we're afraid to do. It's kind
Do
of
you feel
another
like you've
present.
learned? Do you feel like you've learned to run into fear?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the, it's it's a huge part of the solution to it. But also too, I think having the courage to know what to say, no to at times. Um, it's not always, like, trying to, like, force our way through something, right? Like, to take the square peg through the circle hole and hammer it through. And I know a lot of times people with our mentalities, with, like, performance related, like, drive, like, can do that. And yet, like, some of the worst decisions I've ever made, I think, I've been trying to do that, trying to force my way through something where, I shouldn't, where, just learning to go and say no to something is, like, such a critical and powerful thing. well, one of my favorite things I ever heard from a business leader was he went through, this guy had I think it was a tech company CEO, and they went through kind of like a big growth period and went from, 80 some odd employees to a couple hundred, and, really wanted to go and keep the same culture inside of the company. And he couldn't do the interviews to hire people anymore himself. And so they had to outsource it. And the way that he did it was he had everybody list out, like, when the interviewing team for a new candidate would come through, he'd say, like, choose, to rank them on a scale from 1 to 10, but you can't choose 7. He said 7 is neutral. 7 is Switzerland. 7 is, you're not going to pick a side. So if you have to choose 8 or 6, then it's decisive as to, like, whether or not the individual has potential. And, generally something that's an 8 or higher you'll do, and something that's a 6 or lower you won't. And so I've applied that to a lot of things in my life. Like, if it's, not something that's like an 8 or higher, then I, don't have interest in doing it.
Yeah, that's a really good systematic way in order to decide. I like that. Thank you for sharing that. You know what I've learned about you after studying you a little bit and having conversations, getting to know you a little bit? You're a little bit of a prankster also. And there's a funny story that I want you to share as we end, kind of lighten things up a little bit, that you and some of your buddies did. You convinced them to help you with a project. Do you know the story I'm referring to?
There's a few. I'm assuming the one might have to do with, like,
the
tomato
ketchup
puree sauce. Yeah.
yeah. Tell that story real quick as we.
Yeah, that was so it was at a church camp, actually, down in Panama City, Florida, and I just messing around and getting into trouble, me and some buddies, and decided that we were going to go into the kitchen and, like, get a can of tomato puree sauce, and went out to the beach. And it was like, the chunky style, like, they dumped this whole can on me and my arms and legs and started screaming shark. And everybody on the beach, like, came running up, and there was a huge group around. And one girl was bawling, crying. She's like, I called 911. The ambulance is on the way. And I popped up and I was like, hey, it was just a joke. I'll see you guys later.
Oh, you're a mess, Kyle. You're a mess, buddy. That is so good. Hey, just real quick, just a couple of things I'm curious about. What's a favorite quote that drives you, that's an inspiration to you?
So one of my all-time favorites was Ralph Waldo Emerson. He said, do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path, and leave a trail.
Wow. He was talking about Kyle Maynard when he wrote that. So, no question about it. What is one non-negotiable daily habit? Like this, I'm going to do this regardless.
I'd say, okay, so to be candid, like, it changes for me at different times. Like, something that, like, I will go through periods
seasons.
Seasons. Like I said, deal with an injury where, like, exercise is an important thing for me. And I think people don't realize how important it is for brain health, performance, like, mood, stability, all of that. And when I dealt with the injury, I remember thinking, like, it just sucked, and I kind of lost that for a little bit, but, like, just do something, whether, walking a little bit, and somebody that, like, is way deconditioned, that has to just start, walking around the neighborhood once, walking to the mailbox and back, whatever it is, it's relative to you. You can go and do, you don't have to be doing ultra marathons, but, for me, when I went and learned that lesson of just, go swim, move. And it doesn't happen every single day, but, most days when I do it, I feel better.
Yeah. No, I can understand that. Couple more questions. What's the best piece of advice that you, Kyle Maynard, have ever received from someone?
What comes to mind, I think, with that is, and I've seen how true it is attitude is contagious. And, I think it's, especially in any sort of, like, leadership role, even inside of, family and friend groups, inside of, moments where you have to, step up. I think it's, attitude itself is truly like, there's a contagion element to it. Like, you catch it from other people. And I think we look at other people, in those situations, and we react so we have to be conscious of that, I think, and take responsibility for it, and realize, that that is the case. Even if we are scared or uncertain, just to realize that we're in control of our attitude as much as we possibly can be.
Another strong push for community, being around other people that can help with that. And without it, there's not any of that. One mountain, whether it's literal or metaphorical, what do you still want to climb? What do you still want to do?
Yeah, I think so. What comes to mind with that is, I've dated some amazing girls over the years, but I've not settled down and gotten married. I've been close a couple times, but I think that like marriage and the family, kids at some point, something to that effect. I think that would be an amazing thing to be able to experience. So, I've got.
Cool.
I think in the meantime, my nieces and nephews are very special to me, and
that's cool. I bet you're a great uncle. I bet you're a great uncle to those kids. So way to go.
Oh, thank you. No, I think, I feel very fortunate. It's just special. I think like something special about being around like kids, like little kids, like to just, they're like just so like free. And I remember my oldest niece one time when she like kind of first became like aware that I was born a little bit different. Like, I remember we were like coloring together in like a coloring book, and she was like, "Uncle Kaka, like you don't have hands." And I was like, "Yeah, no, I don't. I was born that way." And she was like, "Oh, okay." And just went back to the color.
Went right on. Yeah. That's so good. The innocence, man, is really beautiful. Kyle, I want to wrap up with something kind of practical. If you could give our listeners a challenge to start living a life of no excuses today, what would that word of encouragement or challenge be from you?
Yeah, I would say, to think back on some of the things that we've talked about today. If you were to pick something in your life, the odds are there's, some area of life that has, gone out of balance and out of whack. And that there's certainly some sort of excuse that's there, whether it's something that we, say or we try to just hide. But it's kind of always the case, right? And if nothing really comes to mind, well, maybe that's the excuse too, right? Maybe it's the fact that we aren't really testing ourselves or stretching ourselves in the way that we could. So I think to, think about something that's tangible. Listening to this is all well and good, but it's just entertainment if there's not anything that's actually done with it. And so I think if you are able to, really take it and do something with it, then, in those moments where we find out that we're capable of more than we realize, those are some of my favorite things that I've ever gotten to experience, is people that have said, some phenomenal things of, you're like, I heard your story, and, whether it's speak somewhere or in an interview or something like that. And they'd say like, I gave up doing X, Y, or Z, or I started doing it, A, B, or C. And, and then this was like the effect that they had from it, whether it was, amazing adventures or, meeting a life partner or starting a, new business. I mean, all kinds of stuff that I heard, over the years. It's been pretty incredible. So I'd encourage everybody that's listening to, go through that, thought. And, if in fact it works and you're able to like overcome and do what you need to do, then come back and tell me about it. Tell us about it, because I think that helps keep us going.
What I hear you say is implementation, right? Otherwise it's just entertainment. So Kyle, how can our audience keep up and follow you? What's the best way to reach out or the best way to follow you?
I think there's probably the best way, people can just type my name into Google. You see, I've got a website. If people wanted to reach out, I'm not super active on social media. I don't use it a whole lot. I know that that's one of those things that I could be doing more of myself too. But, it's one of those things that I prioritized. That's, a whole other thing, right? I could be making excuses about that too. Just not my favorite. But, in terms of...
go to Google then, and you
there's
have
a lot of stuff out there.
lot of videos out there. A lot of content out there that's really good. Kyle, I want you to know, buddy, how much I've enjoyed today and how much I've enjoyed this opportunity to interact with you and to interview you and hear your heart. And it just makes it even that much more inspirational to me. So thank you, first and foremost, for being on the ISI podcast today. And brothers, I hope you guys are really hearing this, not just the story, but the invitation. You may never climb Kilimanjaro, but you've got mountains in your life right now that you need to overcome. And the truth is, the summit is waiting for you. So here's your challenge. I want you to identify one excuse you've been holding on to and write it down. Call it out and replace it with one action step this week. No waiting, no stalling, no excuses. I know without a doubt you can do it. Kyle, thank you so much for showing us what's possible, where we have been inspired today by this. And I'm excited to see you guys next week to interact more with you on the podcast. So Kyle, thank you again, buddy.
Thanks, big guy. I appreciate it.
All right.
You too.
See you, buddy.